All right, welcome to another round of collective sensing. This week's pretty special. We have Richard Bartlett joining us. He's a founder of Lumio, which we probably are all familiar with. So that needs no introduction, and has been part of Inspiral since the early days in helping guide that decentralized organization. But I won't introduce him much more because I'm sure he's got his own. So what we're going to do here is for the first hour, we're going to let him take the stage. I know he's got a lot to share, and then open up to some Q&A. And then the second hour we'll use just for regular collective sensing. So those who are lamplighters, stick around for the second half. Those who aren't, feel free to say your goodbyes, and we'll see you next time. All right, without no further ado, we won't do a check-in. We'll do that after this first hour. So with no further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Richard. Let him take the floor.
Thank you. I hope it's okay. My plan for today was to spend quite a bit of time talking about myself. It's one of my favorite topics. I think I'm so fascinating. No, it's not because I think I'm so fascinating. I want to kind of give you a little bit of my CV as a way of introducing a lot of topics really about self-organizing groups at different scales. And I thought my CV is at least one way to structure it. There's a lot of pieces. It could be a bit complicated, and hopefully I can do a useful synthesis and do like a download of some of my experience. And my intention really is like, from the exploration I've done about seeds and Hypha so far, it seems like there's something really exciting here. I'm interested, and I see this as like a first date, and I hope it goes well and we get to see each other again. I'm really trying to get to know you and see how I can plug in and help. So this is a kind of like introduction to sort of my field of knowledge and expertise, so that you know me a little bit better. And I'd love to, I can imagine already a lot of different collaborative opportunities, but I need to get more of a feel about who you are and like what are your real strengths and what are your pressing challenges and all that sort of stuff. So my thought for today was like, yeah, a big download of my CV. And then the other half of the conversation will be about looking at where you are as a team and what are you trying to achieve, and what are the most pressing, most urgent sort of challenges and doubts and concerns and that sort of thing. And I didn't take the time to make some impressive slides, but I did at least take some notes and find some, what's the word? Emojis to illustrate. I'm just cutting and pasting, but it's breaking. Let me just fix that up. Because I feel like I need to introduce quite a few different pieces. And like I say, that could get complicated, but at least having these notes here is going to keep me somewhat succinct and try and hopefully keep us understanding all these different terminologies that I'm going to introduce. So the first on that list is Occupy. So the Occupy Wall Street movement kicked off in 2011. Prior to that, I had no real connection to activism or social change or any real vision about how the world could be different. I was pretty dissatisfied with the way the world was, but I just sort of took that for granted, that work sucks and we're destroying the planet and that's really sad, but I wasn't really engaged with the sense that we could do anything about it. And I got into Occupy, and like, that was just hugely transformative for me. That's the short version. And it was just so unimaginable and unexpected to see a mass movement. Like, there was something like 850 camps around the world that all took over public space and started to run, libraries and kitchens and open air universities and so on. And it just happened literally overnight, that there was no central coordinating body. There was no real strategy. There wasn't really a plan. It was this truly bottom-up, decentralized emergence. We were coordinated by a couple of memes, a couple of tweets, a couple of videos we saw on YouTube, and that was it. There was it was about a moment of readiness. There was sort of a spark that ignited a moment of readiness, and it made a lot of people change their lives, myself included. And ultimately, I think it was quite chaotic. For people that participated in it, we've got a lot of war stories about how a lot of the camps didn't go very well in the long run. And so that was like a glimpse of something that was possible, but also a real recognition of the shortcomings of, basically, it's not enough to just get rid of the old traditional hierarchies. We actually need to replace them with structures that are better adapted to the values that we have in the world that we're trying to create. And creating those structures maybe is not an overnight process. Maybe that takes a bit of effort and design and engineering and growing and evolution. So straight after Occupy, I got really lucky and met the Inspiral network just as it was in its early stages. And that's what we call a Dunbar scale. So it's like 100, 200 people. And that's been a place for me to experiment with self-organizing human systems over the long term. So I've been there nearly 10 years. And that network, we've got, at the moment there's 230 of us, I think, and we're all more or less engaged, at different depths of engagement, but we're all experimenting with how can we organize without a traditional hierarchy, and how can we use our work for purpose? Like, how can we do stuff that feels meaningful, that's making a positive contribution in the world, and how do we support each other to do that? And that has been an extraordinary place for me to learn, just being embedded in that network for 10 years. It's like, I think about it, it's kind of like a DAO before we had the technology to actually run a DAO. We just had the people and the willpower and some spreadsheets. So we have, for instance, collaborative ways of allocating money that people share some of their income to the collective, and then everyone can like vote and distribute the money. And then, okay, it turns out that's easy. What's hard is the accountability and the follow-up on after the money has been distributed. Did the work actually get done? We got rid of the boss, but how do you replace what the value that the boss was offering? This is the hard stuff. And so we've been in that for a long time. Also, what are the long-term impacts of using one decision-making protocol over another one? And that's the stuff that we've been embedded in for years. And it has informed a lot for me about how do these self-organizing teams work, because you can think of Inspiral really as a network of small teams and companies. There's maybe 30 small, and all the companies, none of them are profit maximizing. They're all impact maximizing companies. And I've had a contact with a lot of them to understand what are the common struggles that people go through as they try and work in a different way, and they try and look for a different way of being together. And we exchange a lot of those lessons, like the mycelium through the forest floor, passing the nutrients around. And we, hopefully what happens is someone learns a lesson the hard way, and then everyone else in the network gets to benefit the easy way. They hear their story and they don't have to go through the struggle and the pain and the heartbreak and the conflict. That's the idea with the network. And then one of the companies within the Inspiral network is Lumio, which, as Ricky said, I'm one of the co-founders of Lumio. And that's just one team, about 10 people, more or less. And again, this is a smaller scale. There's more focus. There's more commitment, more opportunity to really get to know the same people over a really extended period of time and try and do something. And what we're trying to do in that case is build a piece of technology that embodies some of our values and theories about organizing. So it's a decision-making tool, for those of you who don't know about it. And I always describe it as like a moderate success. It's like a partial success. It's cool because there's a few tens of thousands of groups that use Lumio to make inclusive decision-making more efficient. I think that's kind of what it's doing. But when we set out, we wanted to be bigger than Facebook, and we didn't quite crack that. So I'm like, a little bit disappointed that we haven't. I don't think we've, it's not the kind of mature manifestation of the change that we wanted to see. But then I really see what Hypha is doing and a lot of other related projects as being kind of the next generation. And I'm offering myself as a granddad here to see if there's anything that we can pass down the generation from what we learned. So after about 5 or 6 years of being completely dedicated to Lumio as a technology product, I got a bit, I guess, frustrated with the limitations of only working in the technology space, that there's only so much you can influence with software, and there's a lot of other stuff happening. There's political currents and cultural changes and economic systems and all these other, there's art happening, there's just so many other things happening in the world that are changing the world. And I felt a bit like artificially constrained just working in software. And so then we started the Hum, and I sometimes call the Hum it's a management consultancy for organizations that don't have managers. So the idea there is we've just spent the last 10 years working in these radically decentralized experimental organizations. We've learned a lot. How do we take those lessons and remove them from their local context and shape them into a way that they make sense in other people's contexts? And that turns out that's actually a really complex job and very engaging for me and very satisfying. And what it looks like in practice is a lot of, we run online courses, retreats and workshops and so on. How do you deal with power dynamics and with decision making and with conflict and accountability and flows of money and all those sorts of things? We've got, yeah, we certainly don't have like a blueprint. We don't have a framework that says this is how an organization should be. I really don't think, I don't think such a framework really exists. Not yet, at least. It may eventually, but I think we're in a stage, collectively, in a stage where we're still in the hyper experimental phase, and we haven't really settled yet on what is the right organizing structure. And I think that could be temporary, it could be permanent. At least my conclusion so far, it seems to be that the best organizational structure, it's unique to the people and the values and the history and the cultural context and the purpose that you're trying to achieve. So we don't come with a proposition that says, just do this structure and you'll be right. What we do have is what we call these patterns. So the patterns are, hey, look, these are the top 10 challenges that really make this way of organizing hugely chaotic and difficult and conflict-ridden and painful. You're going to have to design solutions to those challenges. They're going to come sooner or later. Here's some suggestions, here's some Lego blocks, and you can decide how they plug together into your own context. And they hopefully will inspire you, and you can invent your own Lego blocks too. You can get your 3D printer out and make your own hybrid shapes. So that's the patterns for decentralized organizing. That's a whole bunch. It's like a growing framework, theory and practices. We've got an online course coming up in March. That's something I'd like to talk about as a possibility. If some of you want to join us for that course, we've got a cohort starting in March. It'd be excellent if some of you could come along. And then the other well, I should say as well, that my sort of takeaway from all of that work, you know, I mean, there's a reason that we run a 6-week training program, right? Like there's just a lot of material in there. But if I had to boil it down to like a tweet or like the shortest thing to hold on to, the memorable thing is basically all of the work, all of the patterns kind of boil down to 2 pillars. And the first pillar is about what I call social fabric. So that's like really intentionally putting a lot of investment into the number and the density and the bandwidth of your connections. So really thinking about the connectivity between our team members is one of our greatest resources. Like the more people know each other, the more they know about each other, the more safe and open they feel in being able to express themselves and just be honest and not have to like do a bunch of, you know, power games or like put on a professional mask of like, I want you to think this about me, so I'll only say this and I'll be careful not to say that. Like the more that you can remove that and have genuine, open, high bandwidth connections between people, the more capable you are of navigating complexity and innovating and handling tension and all that sort of stuff. So there's just so many rewards for investing in social fabric. And we've got a ton of practical things that you can do to make that happen. But it just means that in the same way as we care about, you know, having a good marketing message and investing in a website and having good performance on our products, we also care about how's our social fabric, and it's someone's job to look after it. It's kind of all of our jobs, but it's just an organizational priority. So that's the one pillar. And then the other pillar is about the rhythm of learning, the rhythm of change. So I haven't got to know most of you yet. I recognize a couple of names. I had one conversation with Ricky, and I can already imagine, knowing these kinds of projects, that there's a kind of personality that's attracted to the core of an ambitious undertaking like this. And these personalities, well, I'll just talk about myself. I've got an extremely high tolerance for chaos. Like I really thrive in multiple perspectives, everything changing, like being guided by my intuition, being stimulated by the unexpected connections between all these different worlds and domains. And that's what nourishes me. And I've learned over the years that I'm actually quite unique in that regard. And most people need a bit more order in their life, and they find that my way of being is way too chaotic. And there's a sweet spot between chaos and order. We talk about the chaotic path. That's a concept from Dee Hock, who's the founder of the Visa Network, who's surprising if you don't know about the story of the Visa Network. It turns out to be really radical and awesome. But the chaotic path is like, there's a sweet spot between chaos and order. And that sweet spot will actually change as the group matures. You might want more or less. And if you have too much of one, you have too much chaos, it looks like Occupy and it disintegrates and it looks like the zombie apocalypse. too much order, and you just have a traditional old institution that's bureaucratic and can't really grow and learn. And so your job is to find that sweet spot. And I really focus on the rhythm of learning to find that sweet spot. So that means, like, yes, you can change a lot. Yes, you can experiment with many different fields, but let's be systematic about, we've got one focus this week or this month, you know, and we're really rigorous about choosing one priority that we want to learn about, one change that we want to make in our organizational structure, for instance. And then at the end of that period, at the end of the month, we're going to stop and reflect and say, hey, we tried that experiment. What did we learn? It's really simple, but it's really crucial and often gets overlooked. So having that, like, stable rhythm of the dependable rhythm, it's the thing that gives you some certainty and dependability while everything else is changing. And if you look into natural systems, I said I was going for a walk before I jumped on this call, and I was thinking about, you know, walking through the forest, for instance, and how the forest is in a natural cycle, right? Like right now, all the trees, because I'm in the Northern Hemisphere, all the trees are busy growing their roots, and they're not busy looking after the leaves right now. And it's roots time. And in a few months' time, it's going to be leaves time, you know, and there's a cycle and there's a time for everything. So that embedding those organizational cycles has made all the difference for us. And the more that you invest in the relationships, the more able you are to learn, because you've got that open transmission of ideas going across. So that's the kind of like distilled, there's your 6-week program, that's done. And then the other couple of pieces that I wanted to name, and these are a little bit, yeah, they're part of my constellation, I guess. So one is micro-solidarity, and that is developing into a community building methodology. And it's about, again, these groups at the Dunbar scale, less than 200 people, who are interested, they're equally interested in emotional and economic intimacy. So it's about a community of belonging and support and connection where I feel like people care about me. And it's a community of work and livelihood where we're supporting each other to put my most generative, constructive energy, my working energy, my sense of like, what's my occupation, doing that in something meaningful and supporting others to do the same. So that's, yeah, it's kind of growing into a global network of communities that are all sharing practices and languages and sharing learning. And I'm kind of like a curator that sits between them and running the switchboard and making introductions and trying to accelerate the shared learning through that process. So that's a whole community building thing. We can another, you know, we run a 4-week program on that. So there's like a whole bunch more stuff for me to talk about. And I also wanted to, I don't know if this is relevant at all, but I wanted to just bring in another one of the hats that I wear is called alter ego. And that's really like a political social change intervention where it's a network of basically leaders who are working in social change, whether they are like designing and leading social movements, or they're in NGOs and think tanks and so on. And we are we're creating a context for those people to evolve and to take a more regenerative, integrated approach to social change rather than the oppositional approach which you often associate with activism. So that's again another community building support. And the reason I wanted to name all of these different parts of my constellation is to say, I'm interested in how, I mean, at the moment, this week, I'm quite enthusiastic and excited about seeds. And I can see just my gut feel from having a few conversations and watching a few things on YouTube and reading some stuff. My gut feel is like, yeah, there's a real chance that this thing could go really big. I know like making money is not exactly the objective. Well, making profit doesn't seem like the objective. Inventing a new kind of money does, but I do see it as like, this is obviously got a really good likelihood of having like $1 billion impact on the economy, for instance. You know, like it just seems like it's got that potential in it. And at the same time, if I'm honest about having connected with other really ambitious projects, especially projects in the crypto space, there also seems there's a high likelihood of chaos and rupture, and that it could be this like massive spike like we had with Occupy, where there's this massive spike and then there's this massive disintegration and heartbreak, and you know, it turns into compost to become the next thing. I think that's also a reasonably high likelihood. And I named all the parts of my constellation because I think all of those parts might have something to offer, and something to gain from participating in this ecosystem. So that's why I felt the need to do the really long version of my CV. And that's a lot of me talking for a minute. My suggestion, and I'm happy to change the suggestion if someone has a different idea, but what I thought we could do is turn the focus off me for a second and in towards your team, and to spend a minute in some reflection. I've got a couple of questions for your reflection, and then we can talk together about, I've named all of these approaches to organizing at different scales. And just thinking about your team scale, like just thinking about the people that are on this call, my question is kind of like, how would you like it to be? What's your vision? What's your principles? What are your values for how you would really like it to be? Like maybe we can just do this sort of tweak version of what you have in mind for how you would love to be working together. That's question one. And then question two is like, where do you have doubts or challenges or a sense of like, I don't know if this is realistic, you know, like, can we actually do it? Are we lacking something? So if you're game for that process, my suggestion was, and I'll put the first question in the chat. My suggestion was just to spend a few minutes in reflection on this first question, how you want to be organized, what your values and principles are, about the way that you're working together as a team. Have a few minutes of quiet reflection. And what we could do, if you've got access to a keyboard, is type a short answer into the chat and just don't press enter yet. And we can all press enter at the same time at the end, and we'll quickly be able to read everyone's. Does that make sense? And that will give me a few moments of quiet. So if you've written some thoughts, I'd love you to share them in the chat. And if you don't have access to typing in the chat, please just unmute and tell us what's on your mind as well. I'd love to see if there's a shared picture here in the room. There's a couple of people in these comments that have mentioned this phrase self-organizing. I would love it if someone could speak to that and tell me, unpack that a little bit more. I use it as kind of a buzzword, and I'd love to hear what it means to you.
Hi, it's Ronnie here. Thanks for that, Richard. That was beautiful, and yeah, amazingly aligned. So really enjoyed listening to your journey. Self-organizing to me means that the individuals who are associated to execute a task are the ones organizing themselves. So the fractal podding out system, so that, you know, you don't have people come, you know, while, yeah, I think of it more in terms of, I come from a financial background and it's budgeting and voting. And I think of it in those concepts that, you know, the people involved in those bits of decisions should organize themselves the way they are most comfortable being organized, and fractal out. And that's what I've learned through, frankly, being through Hypha. I haven't come from the background that you have at all. I came from a 20-year institutional finance background. And so for me, you know, right at the front, you mentioned accountability. And that's probably the one piece that I spend more of my time fretting about than others do. But I do understand the beauty in the chaos as well.
I'm curious if you or anyone else in the group has a picture in mind of what accountability looks like in a self-organizing context. Like, I'm assuming it's different from the accountability I learned at school and in my engineering firm. But I wonder if any of you have got like a picture of what that is.
Sure. Let me take a stab at that. First of all, thank you, Richard. It was great conversation you started. I'm coming from the Digital Life Collective, so our paths have crossed, I think, with Christina Bowens and Philip Sheldrick. We did some good things there with Lumio too. And so we focused at that time a lot on sociocracy, right? So how do you build these kind of organizations that are self-organizing, where you can put these activities towards the edge of the organization, right? And a lot, you know, is happening here now. It's kind of an interesting mix of sociocracy, holacracy, you know. We call it the do here. So that's the decentralized holonic organization or organism, really, right? So keep it very organic, keep it very evolving, keep it very dynamic, right? So you really can't predict the patterns that are evolving out of these kind of organizations. And we encourage that, right? It's a very much an emergent structure. We see where people feel attracted to. And once they're there, they begin to form these typical circles you see in these sociocracies, right? And then out of this come these accountabilities. We also work with Joost Schalten, who's a member. He created the Nestor tool to sort of visualize a lot of these structures and see where you are and sort of make it more tangible, make it more accessible, visible, really. That's one of the core mantras here. Make our knowledge visible, make the contributions, the activities visible across the organization, right? It's a very transparent organization. It's very open, you know. So that's at the heart of this. And I think from that came the notion of, okay, since you're here, you stepped into a certain role, right? So one of the big features of the do here is to specify what kind of role you're bringing into the organization. And along with the role and the circle comes the notion of accountabilities, right? So what are you actually doing in your role? Something happens in the organization, can people step up to you and say, hey, what just happened? Or can you help me with moving this forward? Because you're in that role, because you're in that circle, right? So this is very much at the core here of the Hypha organization, how we can, you know, decentralize this more and more, pushing it towards the edges of the organization, but even don't stop there. You know, for me, it's very much what you said about the network that we're building, sort of the knowledge we're sharing here all together is the adjacent possible, you know, as Christina Bowens likes to say, is who else is in this space, right? How can we push the knowledge further towards the edges, right? Not staying just within the Hypha construct, but now replicating Hypha into much more different, more diverse but still related spaces, right? It's related in terms of the regenerative economy and society we want to build with this. So for me, this is then coming back to your question about the accountability, right? So people holding on to certain pieces of it and say, yep, I feel this is something I'm working on. I have the expertise, the knowledge, the motivation. I'm driven towards that. And I represent that piece of this living organism that we're all building here, right? But it's not an easy path. You know, you're right when you're talking about there's so many steps forward, 2 steps forward, step back, right? Are we there yet? No, it's still moving. It's an ongoing, changing, dynamic thing, and we're all building that together, right? That's part of the journey. We're coming here together to build this thing, whatever it is, that will help us to go through this transition here. I'll stop here.
Yeah, Richard, I'd like to say something about what you said a little bit earlier about your high tolerance for chaos. I work a lot with Native and Indigenous people, and I call this, and within that kind of working situation, I call this the patience with ambiguity, and is a very rare skill set, but a necessary skill set, because if you close off and impose order too soon, you lose the opportunity to see the self-organizing element arise. And in chaos theory and the studies of complexity systems, you see something called implicate order. And there is an implicate order that emerges from chaos, but you have to have the ability not to foreclose and impose order before that implicate order allows itself to express itself. And that happens in all natural systems if you let it. And it happens in human systems as well. So when you're working with talking circles, which are typical Native American ways, for example, of working with each other, you can see how they work in small groups. But when you start going to scale, that's a whole different question that humanity has very little experience with. So I think of Hypha as an experiment and a really wonderful new human breakthrough in how do you create, using technology and blockchain, how do you create ways of allowing the expression of order coming from self-organization impulses within all of us? How do you allow that to emerge over a large scale? And that we're still working with. And I like you, I'm sort of a business intuitive kind of a person. I see that Hypha and Seeds have a tremendous opportunity to work at scale. And there's been a lot of work done over the last 4 years to make that happen, and it's still going on. And I personally believe it will be successful at a larger level and offer the world an example of an alternative option for how to go forward in a way that's sustainable and equitable for humanity.
Yeah, I'm there. I wanted to speak briefly to this idea of patience with ambiguity. It reminds me a lot of the concept from Keats, negative capability, which is this like ability to sit with uncertainty and to actually not shy away from it, but to assume that there might be something good in there. And for me, I wanted to just connect that to what I was describing as my key takeaways. Like a lot of the reason that people are not patient with ambiguity, a lot of that is about, it's my understanding of it, it's about like my sense of psychological safety in the group. And if I'm really not feeling certain of my position, if I don't feel like my voice is going to be heard, or if I don't feel that I can disagree and still belong, then these kind of ambiguities are going to be perceived as a threat. And that's why we put so much energy into cultivating the social fabric, creating environments where people trust each other and they feel a genuine sense of belonging, because it makes us much more capable of sitting with that discomfort and saying like, okay, there is a risk, there's also an opportunity, and it's okay to be in this. I'm willing to explore, I'm willing to try stuff, I'm willing to not know, I'm willing to keep going without knowing. And it's also why we have this focus on being systematic about the learning cycles as well, because it says, yes, it's ambiguous, but there is actually some things that are dependable. And that it seems to create a kind of settling or harmonizing effect. It's kind of like having a conductor in an orchestra, right? Like they don't need to be calling the shots, but they do help people to synchronize with each other.
Yeah, I think ultimately there's a, a silent pulse that runs through all of us. In fact, there's even a book called The Silent Pulse. And by having patience with ambiguity, you can allow that silent pulse to emerge, which contains the implicate order, and the facility to have patience with ambiguity comes not very, you cannot train that into somebody, as it turns out. We've tried to do that. The person has it as an internal skill set for where they are in their own soul's journey, or they don't. And if they have it, there are certain situations where patience with ambiguity is really necessary. And for example, if you're leading a circle, talking circle, when do you begin to impose order on that talking circle? If you do it too soon, you lose the wisdom of the group and nothing really emerges. So if you have somebody, a leader of that circle who has patience with ambiguity, almost always you can see a beautiful pattern emerge that was there in the collective, and it emerges slowly as a beautiful flower coming out, but you have to let it happen. And some people have a propensity to want to put premature closure on those things, and then that flower doesn't bloom.
I'd like to add in a bit of geometry or spatial to the question of order and emergence and self-organizing and accountabilities. And to me, it feels kind of like the chaos of the energy of, animated steam. Or a flock of birds, and there's chaos, but there's a journey that then comes into focus, sometimes only briefly. But what I would like in our kind of self-organizing in this journey here is that there's something kind of really fun about what you said with the roots are growing and then the leaves are growing. And we know that the roots are going to start growing again more profoundly, and then the reeds, this rhythmic cycle. And it's kind of like that aha moment of the collective where we now we know where our journey is, but it became momentarily in focus, and that provided this huge energetic aha, like smile. And the journey is going, but we are on a shared collective. That's something that is foundational, and that we care for passionately for that collective journey, and fully welcoming the skills, wisdom, and participation of all that show up.
If I may, incredibly beautiful. Thank you. Oh gosh. So I kind of want to answer your question, Richard, weave it into all the different wisdom that just was shared. And it was my perspective on what is self-organization and what's the animating light that's going through people that's causing the chaos. And we shared it with our regenerative ikigai, like what's that core purpose that is animating us? Like that is our self-determination, and that's what we're accountable to. We're kind of accountable to Hypha and to our team members, but I'd say that's a secondary accountability to us being accountable to our own purpose and our own passion and our own pursuit, and what we feel we need to bring to this movement. Because what Hypha is able to do then is then capture people who can do that in the context of Hypha, but then help people who aren't supposed to be doing that in the context of Hypha do it somewhere else, where they're going to better serve their purpose and passion. So I feel like that's where we're going to, kind of solve the accountability problem, because you don't have to hold people accountable if they're self-driven. If they're in passion and purpose and they're driving and moving forward and creating from their heart's core, like that's the drive. The drive isn't you have a deadline or you got paid so you have to do this. The drive is they're going to do it whether or not they're getting paid. and it's just a side benefit that they also get to, you know, eat and put a helm over their heads. So I feel like that's maybe how we could evolve Hypha, is focus on that regeneration of serving purpose, and then accountability kind of starts serving itself under that umbrella. Potentially, I mean, it's all theory at this point, but that's the animating light that I love and how I like to see us organized.
That's cool. I'll add to that. Yeah, I've been, well, since Occupy really, so now a decade, I've been really paying more attention to my inner compass, you know, and that's my sense of purpose, my sense of like, is this action aligned with my compass or not? And I'm getting more sensitive to it, and I'm trusting it more and risking bigger decisions on my compass instead of my brain. And it works for me. And certainly I hear what you're saying about when I'm on purpose, that's the source of motivation, not the threat of punishment if I don't deliver, you know? And on top of that though, I still need support from other people to be at my best. Like, it's much easier for me to keep up my yoga habit when I'm in a yoga class than when I'm doing it on my own. You know what I mean? Like I'm a social creature, and when I've got the reflection from others coming back at me, reminding me of my intentions and my commitments, it certainly helps. And so the transition that I had to go through in my head was seeing accountability as basically it's like a punishment system, right? It's kind of like a threat of, if you don't do this, then this bad outcome will happen, and so then you will do the good thing. To more seeing it in terms of support, and it's like, I mean, even in terms of like how, as someone who has like a leadership position in a team, how I shifted from, hey, Reiki, why didn't you do what you said you were going to do? You know, having that punishment parent-child sort of dynamic, to, hey, I noticed you didn't do what you said you were going to do. What support do you need? Like, how can I help you live up to your commitments? Like, what needs to change? Is there something that another person can offer you? Do you need to inquire more into why you made those commitments in the first place? Like, creating that context of support. And that the big, the crucial distinction for me is about, I think about it in terms of autonomy and consent, that I can, as an adult, as an independent autonomous agent, I can, in my own process of maturing, notice like, oh, I'm much more effective when I have the reflection of other people around me. I'm much more focused and coordinated when I know that there's, you know, like if I'm doing an online course by myself, or if I'm doing an online course with 5 people, I'm just like 1,000 times more likely to complete when I'm in a group. And I know that about myself. And so I can use my own autonomy to ask for that kind of support and say, hey, this is my objective. I know if I'm on my own, I'm likely to drop the ball. But with a bit of support, could you check in with me once a week and ask if I'm delivering on those things? And it's like, I'm proactively engaging there, and that can become a normal practice that happens with your team, where people are making those requests of each other. Sometimes we call that contracting. It's like, hey, I know this is the support that I need to be at my best, and we can make that normal. I'm watching the clock. It's one of my somewhat obsessive tendencies, and I don't want to go over time. And so I do want to hear if there are, what my sense was that perhaps the best use of my time at the moment is just to, to hear any doubts or concerns or struggles, or like, here's a puzzle that we really feel like we're missing a few pieces. I love reading through these comments and seeing this, what to me is a really beautiful and inspiring vision of a way of working. And I wonder if there are some misgivings or doubts that anyone wants to name, whether out loud or in the chat.
Yeah, I have one. I was waiting for that moment. I'm Nikolaus. Yeah, so what like there's amazing wisdom in this group, obviously. But when you were talking, what I was thinking is that, you know, we kind of have a lot of stuff already, but we have practical problems. So what's the practical issue that we run into? Like, that's like, oh, and I feel like there is currently a practical issue of being able to say no to something that is not good for the organization, because we have this decentralized system. It's very transparent and it's very social, right? So it's sort of like nobody kind of wants to be the bad person that says no to something, basically. So I'm sure you've run into that, and I would be really interested in that.
Yeah, great question. It's a hard one. It's one of these ones where, oh, yeah, me too. Me too.
Yeah.
One of my mentors, when we were starting Lumio, in the first few years, we had the same situation, you know, and the way that she framed it, she said, you know, this group is so strong in love and not so good with power. As in that there's got to be, you know, if you think about maybe in a parenting context, you want to offer so much compassion and generosity and care for your child, but you also have to hold a certain boundary. You know, there are times where you need to be able to intervene and say, no, you do not run on the street.
Yeah, it's about boundaries and keeping the energy inside and things like that.
Yeah, so my sense is probably, this is part of the social fabric for me too. It's like getting to know some of the deeper stories about what's going on there. What are the motivations? Why would someone be reluctant to impose a boundary? What are the values at stake? And really, this is the kind of thing we do on team retreats, is really unpack that conversation for half a day, you know, and just a bit of practicing the patience of the ambiguity of like, let's just try and understand what's going on here. We're not trying to engineer a solution. We just want to understand what are these dynamics that are playing out. And when it does come to solutions, my instinctive approach is to rely on the fractal. Like that means I'm a part of the system, and what's my relationship to saying no? And where do I feel like I'm really able to say no and I'm acting in service when I do that? And when do I feel like I'm not able to hold that anchor, and like what's going on there? And then if there's a few of you in this group that are really good with boundaries, it's good to know who those people are and say, hey, we need to be elevating your voice for a moment, because it seems like we've got this. And that's what, I mean, I'm just for the moment assuming that you're pointing to something that's actually there that other people can see. But that's another process, right? Is that we would, part of our regular rhythm is to say, looking back on the last week, what worked really well and what was not so good. And we get a bunch of post-it notes, and then we prioritize them. And if the top one says, hey, it looks like we're not very good at saying no, then that becomes a shared sense of this is a priority for us to work on. And we try and take experimental steps in the right direction, starting from the micro scale and then slowly expanding.
Yeah, we had this idea for to build in some sort of role in seeds where these people's role is to say no to things. That's just their role, to say no to things that are detrimental to seeds. So that was the governance of seeds. It wasn't really any governance of Hypha, because those are two different things, but it was kind of in similar, because in seeds also, there's no reason to say no to anything at the moment. You know, you can just always say yes. It's never your money. There's no reason to say no. It's a bit different from Hypha, but we see it in both organizations. Thank you.
I think I speak with so Paulo Carvalho here. So very nice the conversation here. A lot of food for thought. And one of the questions that I have, and I think it's related with this thing that Nick just mentioned, is how can we develop our ability to sense the organism, not to sense our own opinions, but to sense the organism and then to give a response from that place rather than the place where we are as individuals? And what can we do to develop that sense?
That's such a rich question. I'm glad this is being recorded, because you've all got really excellent questions that will take a lot of reflection and development, and you could have a big conversation about each one. I know for myself, maybe you've even noticed in how I've been talking that I try and own my own perspective. And I think that's an important part of the sensing process. And like you say, Paolo, that's not enough. You know, the individual perspective is not enough. We need a collective perspective. And just, I see it as the agents need the competence to understand their own perspective and the confidence to own that perspective and say, this is what I see. And this is where things like nonviolent communication can help, or other kind of frameworks for structuring communication, which is like, from this perspective, this is what I saw, this is what I felt, these were my needs, you know, these were my expectations, can kind of express in that way. And I think it's only when you've got the capacity for honest declarations from the I that you can get a meaningful reading of the we. And often when people don't feel really safe and really like they're ready to express themselves fully, they'll protect themselves slightly by talking from we or talking from you. Like, you know how you can get really exhausted when you're working every night and you never get a break? It's like, that's a way of me. It's a very, very common mode of speech, but it's a way of not being too closely personified for an issue that's actually my issue. You know, I'm really exhausted from working every weekend, but I have to decouple. And so like when you notice people using you or we, when they mean I, it's usually a symptom of a lack of sense of safety. And we need to use like gentle practices to bring people back into the I. And once we've got an accurate sense of what are all these I perspectives, then we can triangulate between them and start to work as like a parabolic dish, you know, that's reflecting from all these different angles. And we're like, yeah, I can't see the whole. This is the lesson that I keep coming to over and over again as someone who's trying to do this collaborative leadership, whatever that word means, is this constant reminder that I can't see the whole, but we can see it. And we can practice in a way which activates our collective intelligence. But I don't know how to get there unless people are really confident in the I first. And a lot of us are socialized not to. So yeah, this is where we get into, it really starts to edge into like group therapy, which is more and more where my work is going to. Like it's not really a joke. It's like a production of a new kind of culture that's different from what most of us were raised to, how we were raised to behave.
I just wanted to say something really quick about Virginia Satir, who started the field of family therapy in the United States. She was a good friend and a mentor of mine, and she specifically addressed the question of no and the importance of saying no, and what is the function of saying no in any social group. And she called it the yes-no medallion. And she said, how important is your yes if you have no no? The no sets the boundary for the identity of the organization. And in order to have a yes that's believable and have any value, you have to have a no that sets the boundaries of the organism. So that's a quick comment on the no.
I've also spent the last week doing sort of a strategic process in our team and the team with the hum. And so much of that is about saying no to good things. You know, there's like 10 good options, and the strategic process is about identifying the one that we're really going to put our energy behind for a dedicated period, knowing that there's all these other temptations over there that they're all good too, but we've just chosen we've got to temporarily say no to those things.
Hey guys, it's Cece here. I feel like this is a perfect opportunity for me to say to you what I'm constantly saying is that you can say no to good things, like, no, this is too late for me, or no, this is too much screen time. And I think this is beautiful. Thank you so much for being here with us, because this illuminates what Nick says, and a lot of the complaints that come through me in my role is that people are feeling really insecure to stand up and speak their truth and their heart compass. And I really want you to be able to feel that. So if this is, you know, ringing true for you and you don't feel necessarily capable yet, we're working on that, then yes, maybe we'll have a role for this, but otherwise always remember that People Circle is here to support you in that, because not everybody's so, you know, confident to say no yet, but we'll figure out ways in which that no can come through. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, like this is the best illumination for that. And so I just want to make sure you guys knew that you're supported in that, because I know it's really hard to speak up when it feels like you're the bad guy or something, but we've got you.
That's so awesome to know that that exists, that you've got that group and that availability and that invitation. That's another big takeaway for us is the destination, at least. And I noticed a few in the chat, some comments about growth and evolution. That to me has become our focus, I guess, is creating a context where every participant in the system is growing. And that means that we're all incomplete, that we're all in development, that there are parts of ourselves that we're not fully proud of yet, you know, that are still growing. And if we can create a context where I can share those parts with my colleagues and say, hey, this is something, I noticed that I have a hard time saying no, or I noticed that I always take up way too much space in meetings because I'm obsessed with my own ideas. Can you help me with this? You know, this is a part that I'm really tending to and need some growth. And creating those kind of conversations really deepens the sense of trust and resilience and flexibility in the system as well. I'm going to be on time because it's one of my core values. And like I said, I've got a bunch of different possibilities of how we could collaborate. I just wanted to not go into the depth of that now. We can sort of be in touch about that, but I wanted to just stir you all up with ideas and possibilities and hopefully a bit of enthusiasm. and leave you to negotiate and see what's actually most pressing for you when I'm not in the room.
Excellent. Thanks, Richard. I'm positive we'll be talking to you soon. So have a beautiful day, and we'll talk soon.
Nice one.
I guess night for you now.
Yeah, and let me say as well, thank you for what you're doing. I know it's a big, important mission. I know it's a heavy struggle. Sometimes I'm sure there's a lot of joy, but I'm sure there are tears sometimes too. And the people of the earth, thank you, as manifest by me today. So what we say in New Zealand is kia kaha, which means be strong, go hard. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard.
Ciao.
Bye, everyone.
So.
And now is a shift to collective sensing. So if you aren't typically on this call, feel free to say goodbye and drop off, or feel free to hang out and listen in if you'd like. Awesome. So maybe first thing we can do is let's just go around. We got a quick reflection on that first hour as our check-in. Anything you wanted to share in this circle, and then we can go into a round of agenda building. Last week we talked about doing our landmarking and pointing forward so we can speak to what are we seeing on the horizon, where are we headed as far as ourselves and our circle, what's our priority and what we're doing right now, and then we can triangulate what we're doing as a whole Hypha organism and check in with that, and then go from there. So I'll go last, and maybe I'll pass it to whoever wants to go first. Just unmute and speak up.
I don't mind going first. Oh, sorry, Mark. Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah, I thought that, first of all, I thought that was awesome. I loved that discussion on accountability and knowing where that went. Yeah, that was really inspiring. It was an interesting reflection to know I was probably on the other side of that Occupy Wall Street piece, and it was such a beautiful reflection to think that we meet here today. So I really took a lot from that and think that was amazing. So that's one thing from me. Hand it over to Mark.
I wanted to just thank the universe for that hour we just had. It just seems more serendipity that continues to happen. So I feel really good about that. I just wanted to add to the tension that of delivering product landmarks, goals and things like that, and finishing things that we previously believed to be important landmarks that are left, half finished. So I have some tension there, and I wanted to bring in, I think it is getting to be close to being really important as seeds matures and seeds do, Samara comes alive. I think it's really important for us to get the PTM back into the pipeline schedule.
Oh, maybe I can go next then. Yeah, cool. Thank you for that. I'll put it on the list. This was really great. It was a great discussion to talk with other people that are doing decentralized organizations. And I feel like I was amazed by our people too, by you guys.